This
You can stay here with me. I'm not gonna
Hi everyone, how's it going?
Hi, it's going okay.
Oh, good. Well, thanks for joining me. I'm gonna get started here really soon. Just want to take 1 second to open up a file that I want to show you guys. So in case you don't know me, some of you already know me. My name is Courtney, and I have passed 15 of these certification exams, and I offer tutoring for many tests. So just in case you're wondering, I know there's a lot of scams out there. Everybody's saying I passed the test, DM me for information, but you can see I'm a real person doing this, and this is my report from the ECOS where you get your scores. You can see all of my scores here, right? So I've passed the same test you guys are taking, and I only make material for Texas. And I think that really sets me apart from a lot of the companies that are nationwide. They hire content experts that know their stuff, but it's not always similar to the test. And I know that because I took the special ed test several months ago. Let's see when I took it. Actually, I took it a year ago. It doesn't seem like that long. Took it a year ago, and I bought a guide by a big company. I won't say the name. And it was all good information about special education. It was all correct. But I noticed it didn't really match up with the competencies in the free manual, right? And if it doesn't match up with the competencies, it's not going to get you ready for the test, right? So in case you're wondering what free manual I'm talking about, if you just Google Texas NESINC manual, it will come right up. And this is the same website where you go to register for your test, but I know some of you may not have registered for your test yet. This is the same place where you'll log on to see your scores when your scores are ready. And in case you're wondering when you get your scores, scores for the 4 subjects come out on Tuesdays and Fridays. So it depends on what day of the week you take your test, what day you'll get it. Now, if you take the STR or something with writing, that takes longer. But we can click on prepare here, click on the drop-down box and go down to core subjects. I bet a lot of you have already looked at this, but in case you haven't, I want to show you. And we can look at overview and exam framework, right? It's a 5-hour test, and you should expect to be there almost the whole time, if not the whole time, with 210 multiple choice questions. So it's an intense test, right? So tonight we'll talk a little bit about social studies. I've got to leave almost exactly at 6 o'clock, so I'm not going to be able to do like a whole competency because there's only 5 competencies for social studies, right? So each one takes a while, but I'm going to cherry pick some of the best stuff. That way you get the best value tonight. So that even though it'll be short, I think you're really going to learn a lot. So you get 40 questions for social studies, and you can see you have 50 minutes. So a little bit over a minute per question. Right now, this free manual is not really enough to pass. Let me show you what I mean. It's very vague. So if we go down and look at the competencies for social studies, this will tell you. Let's go down to competency 5 because that's the one I want to do tonight because I think that's the one most people want help with, which is government, right? So court cases, amendments, things like that we all learned in school, but we might not really remember, right? So for example, it's going to tell you that the key principles and ideas contained in major political documents like the Declaration of Independence, U.S. Constitution, Texas Constitution. Okay, that's very vague and broad, right? So in my course, I'm going to pick out the parts of the Declaration of Independence, U.S. Constitution, Texas Constitution that you actually need to know. That way you don't have to read all of those documents, right? Because most of us, let's face it, we're not going to sit down and read the whole Constitution of Texas and the U.S. and everything like that. So tonight we will cover like I said, part of competency 5, and I'll go through the parts that I think are most important. So even though we don't cover the whole competency, we're going to cover the most important parts. So you can see in my course that everything is aligned to the competencies, right? So competency 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, every single competency has a video. In case you're an auditory or visual learner, you need to hear it, you need to see it, right? And it says you have to know the origins of democracy. So the origin of the word democracy, it means a form of government in which supreme power is vested in the people, right? So where did democracy start? Most historians think it started in Greece, right, in the 6th century BC, but maybe some prehistoric tribes voted for leaders. But interestingly, they called it a democracy, but only citizens could vote, which of course excluded women, slaves, minors, and people not from Greece. So maybe not what we really think of as a democracy, but it was the first form of democracy. Rules and laws. We know that laws are there to protect us, right? To keep us safe and free. Rights are protected freedoms that belong to all American citizens, like the right to freedom of religion. Responsibilities are the duties that we have to do. Like voting is a right and a responsibility. We don't have to do it, but it's our right and our responsibility as a good citizen, right? The Bill of Rights and other amendments outline the rights and responsibilities of American citizens, protections for us, right? So there's 20-something amendments, but I only teach you the ones you have to know for the test, right? So I'm cutting out a lot of them. We do need to know the first 10, the Bill of Rights, right? The First Amendment, freedom of speech and press, peaceably assemble, freedom of religion. Second Amendment, we mostly know that one, the right to bear arms, right? Third Amendment prohibits the government from making homeowners house soldiers. They call that quartering soldiers. That's prohibited. Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable search and seizure of a person. Fifth Amendment protects people accused of crimes by stating that serious criminal charges must have a grand jury. A person cannot be tried more than once for the same offense. And people do not have to incriminate themselves. That means you can plead the fifth, right? You cannot be put in prison without due process or a fair trial, and states that property cannot be taken away unless there's just compensation. So if the state or the county or whatever decides to put a road through your yard, they have to buy your property from you. The Sixth Amendment, right to a public and speedy trial. Seventh Amendment guarantees the right to a jury trial, even in federal civil cases. Eighth Amendment prohibits excessive fines and bails, as well as cruel and unusual punishment. Ninth Amendment outlines that specific rights of the people are not limited to those in the Constitution. Just because a right is not protected by the Constitution does not mean that people do not have that right, right? And the 10th Amendment states that the federal government is limited to only the powers granted to the U.S. Constitution. So what happened is when the U.S. was first formed and they wrote the Constitution, some people were really worried about the federal government getting too powerful, right? So they drafted the Bill of Rights to limit the powers of the federal government. Then we have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, all have to do with the end of the Civil War. 13th Amendment prohibiting slavery. 14th granting citizenship to all males born, so including Black males that used to be slaves. 15th Amendment granted citizenship, sorry. 15th is the right to vote. So 14th is citizenship, 15th is the right to vote, regardless of race, color, or previous status as a slave. 16th Amendment, federal income tax. 18th is prohibition of liquor, right? 19th is when women got the right to vote. So you can see it was a few amendments later, right? 21st Amendment repealed prohibition. So I always think of it as like 18 and 21 are the legal ages, and those were the amendments, right? That took away the right to buy liquor and then gave it back, those legal ages. And the 22nd Amendment limits the president to serve only 2 terms. All right. So we know there's 3 branches of government, right? The legislative branch is composed of the Senate and the House of Representatives. It's Congress, right? There are 435 elected representatives in the House of Representatives, and each state gets representatives depending on their population, right? The Senate each state has 2 senators, right? The executive branch is not only the president, but also the executive departments, independent agencies, commissions, and committees, of course, the vice president too. They carry out and enforce laws. So the legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch carries out the laws, and then the judicial branch is the Supreme Court and the court system. They decide how to interpret the meaning of laws, right? So just like the federal government, Texas has 3 branches in their government. So we have the executive branch, the governor is the chief executive. Then we have the lieutenant governor, attorney general, comptroller of public accounts, the commissioner of agriculture, and the commissioner of general land offer, right? They carry out and enforce laws. Legislative is 181 members, including 31 senators and 150 members of the House of Representatives. Senators serve 4-year terms. House of Representatives serve 2-year terms. The legislative branch makes laws, just like in the federal government. And then the judicial branch is 9 judges of the state Supreme Court, and also 9 members serving on the Court of Criminal Appeals and other members that serve on other courts of appeals, state district courts, county courts, all of the local courts. And they interpret laws and decide how they should apply. All right. So what are the governments responsible for? Well, the federal government is responsible for national security, foreign policy, admitting new states, amending the Constitution, borrowing money, printing money, regulating commerce, handling federal taxation, establishing and maintaining post offices, punishing federal crimes, and handling immigration. The state governments have rights that are not specifically reserved for the federal government in the Constitution. The states make state laws, collect taxes, enforce laws, maintain state parks, and grant driver's licenses, vehicle registration, handle birth and death certificates, unemployment and licensing for professionals like cosmetologists, teachers, pharmacists, attorneys. That's why if you guys get certified in Texas, you move out of state, you have to go through a process to get certified in that other state, right? Sometimes they have reciprocity where they accept the other tests, right? So that's something to check into if you happen to be somebody from another state. And then local governments, usually municipalities, including cities and towns. They're responsible for police and fire departments, emergency medical services, public transportation, public works, municipal courts, housing services, schools, parks, and recreation. Sometimes there's a disagreement over who does what, right? State and federal courts decide how to interpret the law. For example, in the case Gibbons versus Ogden, the Supreme Court reinforced that commerce regulation belongs to the federal government, and the state cannot grant a monopoly to anyone to exclusively use a waterway, right? So how are these governments financed? Through taxes, right? So federal government can collect your federal taxes, your Medicare, your Social Security. The state governments, some states have income taxes. Texas has property tax, right? And sales tax. And then the local governments collect tax. So like this, the 8.25% or however much you pay when you go buy anything, just about, right? Your sales tax, 6% goes to this, 6.25% goes to the state, and the rest goes to the county, right? That's the breakdown. Okay, so let me see how we're doing on time. Good, we're going to skip some stuff, but we'll do this one. The Declaration of Independence, people have unalienable rights that are given by the Creator, including the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal. When a government becomes oppressive, the people have the right to abolish it and begin a new government. The British government had a long list of abuses against the colonies, including standing armies, forcing colonists to house soldiers, protecting soldiers by crimes by having mock trials, and suspending the colonists' legislatures and legislating for them, taxation without representation. The U.S. is a free country absolved of its allegiance to the British crown and could wage war, make treaties, conduct commerce, and perform other duties as any independent country would. That's called national sovereignty. And the U.S. is breaking away from England with the authority of the good people of these colonies, popular sovereignty. So that's the key highlights of the Declaration of Independence. See how I only give you what you need to know and nothing extra. So I have bought some other programs whenever I'm studying for a test and I haven't written my own study guide yet. And some of them are so long and overwhelming, but I think you're going to see that tonight we're going to get through a lot of this competency in less than 30 minutes, right? So you could get through the whole competency in less than an hour, and there's only 5. So my course is not going to take you months to get through, right? You can do it fairly quickly. You're still going to take some time because you probably need to do it more than once. It's like anything else. You probably can't just read it once and really understand it. So I will send you guys this recording. That way you can watch it again and really reinforce this. Now, for the U.S. Constitution, separation of powers among those three branches we already talked about. A description of the powers vested in each branch, the process to amend the Constitution, the division of federal and state power, the protection of personal liberty, like the Bill of Rights that we talked about, and permanent protections of a constitution. That's the main things to know. The Texas Constitution, popular sovereignty, that all political power is inherent in the people. Republicanism, the Constitution outlines a Republican form of government in which the people elect leaders. This has nothing to do with the Republican Party, right? This is a form of government. So the Republican Party is maybe who you're voting Democrat or Republican or independent, right? But this is a form of government in which people elect leaders. I've noticed sometimes people get that confused. Federalism means some powers belong to the federal government, and those not listed for the federal government belong to the states or the people. We already talked about the separation of powers among the three branches. There's checks and balances. Each branch can check the other branches. Limited government. The power that the state government has is limited by the powers listed in the state constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and any other relevant laws made by the U.S. Congress and treaties. As a result, the governor, legislature, and courts can only perform the functions that are granted them. Individual rights. The people of Texas hold personal freedoms and protection as well as equality under the law as granted by the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the state constitution and the Texas Bill of Rights. So now we're going to skip ahead because I want to leave time for questions too and end right on time. So we're going to skip ahead to the Supreme Court cases because I feel like that's something that most of us need to brush up on, right? And if you just Google Supreme Court cases, you're going to get a bunch of them, right? There's a lot of Supreme Court cases. So how do you know which ones? Well, I know because I've looked at the manual and all of the free questions. I've taken the test, right? And I never ask people what's on the test because all of you sign that affidavit that you will not release test questions, right? But people innocently ask me questions about this court case or that court case, so I know indirectly which ones I'm hearing about are the ones that are on the test, right? So we can narrow it down to just a handful of court cases, which is very helpful, right? So we have Marbury versus Madison. I'll show you how many it is. McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons versus Ogden, Worcester versus Georgia, Dred Scott versus Sanford, Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board of Education. Now, like I said, there's a lot more, but these are the ones that I feel confident you're going to see on the test, and the other ones probably not, right? So Marbury versus Madison, the main thing to know about that is judicial review. That's like, if you only remember one thing about Marbury versus Madison, remember that, right? So this is when the Supreme Court declared an act of the U.S. Congress unconstitutional. This was by Chief Justice John Marshall, who wrote the opinion of the court. Shortly before Thomas Jefferson was inaugurated, Congress set up 16 new circuit judgeships, as well as some other new judgeships. President Adams filled the judgeships with Federalists in an attempt to continue the control of the Federalist Party of the judiciary and thwart the plans of Jefferson, because they were about to have a change of power, right? Marbury was among the last to be appointed to a judgeship and therefore received his commission after Jefferson was inaugurated. Since Jefferson had not selected him and did not approve of the selection, he asked his Secretary of State, James Madison, not to carry out the commission. Marbury petitioned the Supreme Court asking it to force Madison to go forward with his appointment to a judgeship. The Supreme Court ironically ruled that the Supreme Court did not have jurisdiction in this case and therefore could not compel Jefferson and Madison to give Marbury the seat. Even though the Judiciary Act of 1789 had given jurisdiction to the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Marshall declared that act unconstitutional. The most important part of this case was the establishment of judicial review, right? Allowing the Supreme Court to declare congressional acts unconstitutional. McCulloch versus Maryland, the Supreme Court declared national supremacy over state action and issues related to authority constitutionally granted to the nation. There was a prohibitive tax enacted in Maryland and the banknotes of the Second Bank of the United States. The lower courts in Maryland upheld the law. The cashier of the Baltimore branch, McCulloch, appealed and the Supreme Court heard the case. Chief Justice John Marshall wrote the opinion of the court, stating that the Constitution granted Congress the power to enact all laws necessary and proper to execute the specific powers Congress holds according to Article 1, Section 8. Because the bank was part of a federal authority, the state did not have the right to create a law. Okay, so the main thing to know about that is national supremacy over state action. See how I put it in bold, what the main thing you need to know. Gibbons versus Ogden, the Supreme Court declared that states cannot make laws that interfere with Congress's ability to regulate commerce, right? This was the one we just talked about the monopoly. So Robert Fulton in New York gained a monopoly on steamboat navigation, right? When Ogden discovered that Gibbons was using steamboats in the same water without paying for rights, he sued him. Ogden prevailed in the New York court, but Gibbons appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, stating he was protected by federal rights for coastal trading. Daniel Webster, that's the dictionary guy, was Gibbons' lawyer, and the Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Marshall, ruled in favor of Gibbons. The Supreme Court stated in 1824 that Congress had the power to regulate commerce, and this important case broke up navigational monopolies in both New York and Louisiana. So this says Congress has the ability to regulate commerce. It's at the national level. Worcester versus Georgia, this says that the tribes have sovereignty. So what happened was in 1832, Samuel Worcester and other white men were convicted of living on Cherokee land without a license from Georgia. Worcester was a minister to the Cherokee Indians. He was convicted in a lower court and sentenced to 4 years of labor in a penitentiary. In Worcester versus Georgia, the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Marshall, you'll see his name a lot, right? Ruled that the relationship between the U.S. and the Cherokee Nation was that of two independent nations, thus declaring that the Cherokee Nation had tribal sovereignty. Worcester's prior conviction was also overturned. The ruling declared that Native Americans, we've got to chat just a second, that Native Americans, lost my train of thought, were sovereign, and it was largely ignored, right? But that's what the court case said. Okay, and I'll answer all questions at the end. I won't forget about you. Dred Scott versus Sander. This court case ruled that all Blacks, whether slave or free, were not and could never be granted citizenship in the United States. In addition, the court ruled that the 1820 Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. This meant that now slavery was allowed in all the U.S. territories. So that's Dred Scott versus Sanford. Plessy versus Ferguson, the court ruled in 1896 that public facilities could be racially segregated as long as they were separate but equal. But we all know they weren't equal, right? The Jim Crow laws in the South were allowed, preventing African Americans from attending the same schools and using the same facilities as Caucasians. Despite the separate but equal clause, the facilities were almost always inferior, the ones for Blacks. And then we have Brown versus Board of Education, was an extremely important case in 1954 in which the Supreme Court ruled by unanimous decision that racial segregation in public schools was not constitutional. The previous precedent of separate but equal facilities was overturned. The separate schools and facilities were not equal, and African Americans lacked access to the same opportunities Caucasian children had. This paved the way for better education for Blacks, desegregating schools. So you can see there's more to this competency, but I can tell you that you can get through this competency pretty quickly because I have a video where I explain everything in 41 minutes. But if you really read it carefully, you could spend more than that, right? But I want to show you that you could get through my whole course in a matter of hours, it's not going to take you months, right? Like some of the programs that have so much information. So let me see, I'll read this question a little bit more carefully. Okay. So yes, I do offer private tutoring. Absolutely. And I can put the link in the chat box. But I always recommend people study first. And you had a really good point. Other than studying the competencies you didn't do well on, I always tell people to study all the competencies, even the ones you did well on, right? Because what if you get a 239 and you just missed one on one of the competencies, maybe you got 6 out of 8 on that competency. If you had 7 out of 8, you would have passed it, right? So study all the competencies, but yes, focus on the ones that you struggled with the most. But here's the link for my core subjects private tutoring. And I do private tutoring for lots of subjects, so tests. So if you're here, sometimes people sign up for this tutoring just to come and see me, right? And they're really taking a different test. So I can send the link for other tests too. But if you feel like you need a course that you're going to actually be able to get through that explains it in plain language, you can see I don't talk like a professor, right? I have a master's degree and I've passed these tests, but I'm not like super academic where I make things complicated. So if you feel like you need a good course, you can click on this link here and go to my courses. They're also affordable. They're to the point, and they'll save you time. The sample questions, we can look at a couple of sample questions. The sample questions are very similar to what you're going to see on the real test. They're not exact, but they're similar. Which is the following true is true about the earliest form of democracy. So we did this one already. Early historians unanimously agreed Greece had the earliest form of democracy, allowing all people to vote. Well, we know that wasn't true. Most historians believe Greece had the first form of democracy, but only male citizens could vote. Yes, I will send these links. And also, I forgot to tell you that I always offer a coupon to people that take the time to come to tutoring. So it's 10% off today if you enroll today. And there is a payment plan if you select Affirm or Afterpay or Klarna. And you can get a payment plan. It's already pretty affordable, so you might not even find that you need that. But some of the payment plans are interest-free, so you could do that. But so we know it's B, right? But we always look at all options because, oh, no problem. Because sometimes there's two answers that are both right, and you have to pick which one is more right, is what I say, right? So we always look at all options. Greece had a form of democracy allowing all native-born citizens to vote, including women. No. Ancient Greece is known for having the earliest democracy, but almost all historians believe some native groups actually had forms of democracy before Greece. Well, it said some do, but the best answer is that most historians believe that. All right. Which amendment protects people from search and seizure without a warrant? Let's see if y'all remember this one. I know I went through them fast. You'll probably have to watch the video, but I'll just pick an answer that somebody puts in the chat and we'll see. So the third amendment is what I'm seeing. So the correct answer, it'll tell you if you got it wrong. So no big deal. You can learn as you go, right? The Fourth Amendment protects against search and seizure, and then it'll tell you what the other amendments are. So even when you're getting questions wrong, you're still learning, right? So that's a little bit about my course in tutoring. But I do have about 3 minutes left, and even if I don't have time for all of your questions right now, if you call or text me, I'd be happy to talk. And some of you might have more private questions too, where you want to talk to me privately. But does anybody else have any questions or comments or anything? No? Well, after the video records, I will be sure to send you guys the recording tonight and the link and the coupon code. But if you want to get started on it now, there's the link and the coupon code. Well, I'm Texas Teachers Today. I'm not affiliated with Texas Teachers of Tomorrow, so I don't know if they'll accept my stuff, but I am CPE approved. I'm approved by TEA. So in my opinion, they should accept anybody that's approved by the state. But sometimes they tell you, you have to do 240, you have to do certified teacher, right? And those programs don't work for everybody. So you can ask them and tell them that I am a CPE provider, which means that TEA has approved me as a provider. So I am TEA approved. I think, yeah, I think it should be okay. But I have heard that they do sometimes require people to do certified teacher. I think they're getting a little bit more open-minded about things, hopefully, because I think all the programs I've bought have some pros and cons, right? But I think the benefit of working with me is that I've taken the tests you guys have taken, right? And I only do stuff for Texas. So I'm not going to waste your time with stuff that's on the Praxis or the CSET or those other tests. But I thank you guys so much. And yeah, if you want private tutoring or my course, then check those links out and I'll hopefully hear from you guys soon. Thank you.
I've got an amazing response. I've talked to thousands of great questions. You can still send suggestions in. It's narrowing it down.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.